Good evening. Thank you for joining us for our 2021 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. I'm Patrick McLean, Director of the Ford Institute here at Albion College. We begin by acknowledging that Albion College and the city of Albion stand on the land of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. These indigenous nations of the Great Lakes region are also known as the Anishinaabe. Through this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the history, gifts, and traditions of these owners of the land and affirm their continued presence and rights to this land. Before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping announcements with you. First, there is a program, PDF, that you'll find is a document in the chat for those watching on Zoom. It's also available on the Facebook page. Secondly, after the benediction, Dr. Fuller has graciously agreed to stay on for some Q&A. So at any time throughout the ceremony, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. And now it is my honor and privilege to introduce Albion College President Matthew Johnson. Dr. Johnson, a sociologist by training, is a global leader in higher education. His career has been particularly distinguished by his many national and international leadership roles in the area of community engagement. Dr. Johnson leads the development of the Carnegie Foundation elective classifications, the elective classification for community engagement, and a multi-year international Carnegie Community Engagement Classification project involving 26 institutions of higher education across the world. Dr. Johnson co-founded and co-directs the National Assessment of Service and Community Engagement. He also sits on the editorial board for Gateway's International Journal of Community Research and Engagement and has been recognized as an Ashoka Change Leader by the Ashoka Foundation. In the 5 years prior to coming to Albion, Dr. Johnson served as Associate Dean of the College for Engaged Scholarship, as well as Senior Fellow and Executive Director of the Swearer Center for Public Service at Brown University. He led several significant shifts at the Swearer Center, including a very strong emphasis on diversity and inclusion. Dr. Johnson has brought this commitment to Albion, establishing the Office of Belonging at Albion and launching the Blueprint for Belonging, a campus-wide initiative designed to solidify our public commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. He has been unwavering in his commitment to making Albion College an anti-racist institution. He also has been unwavering in his commitment to deepening the relationship between Albion College and Albion community, which makes his presence here tonight so meaningful. Students, alumni, community members, and friends, please welcome the 17th president of Albion College, Dr. Matthew Johnson.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Your intro of me will be embarrassingly longer than my comments perhaps tonight, but it's very generous of you. I wanted to welcome everyone this evening to our MLK Convocation. This convocation is about building a community of belonging, something we are all working at here at Albion College. I like to say that diversity asks who's present. Equity asks, what's the context? Inclusion asks, whose voice is being heard? But belonging feels. And that's what we're striving for here at Albion, that we are a place of belonging where everyone feels that they belong and that Albion belongs to everyone. That, I hope, honors the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we are here to celebrate today. His commitment to racial justice, to economic equality, to very specific issues like affordable housing and labor rights. And in fact, today we would know he would be out on the front lines of health disparities as well. These echo today across last summer and the activism of the summer of 2020, continuing through the community actions we've seen across our country over the last several months, even up to and including just last week when NAACP youth groups in Marshall made their voices heard about what they face even in one of our local communities. Those students walk in the footsteps of Dr. King and the civil rights movement and the other leaders that led the movement with him. We know that the fight for justice is ongoing, and that justice is the foundation of belonging. Conversations like tonight are critical to reaching justice and building belonging. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Oveta Fuller is here to talk with us this evening. Before Dr. Fuller speaks, I want to introduce an Albion College Board of Trustee member, Mayola Dunklin, and NAACP Chair, Robert Dunklin. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. My name is Robert Dunklin, President of the Albion Branch of the NAACP, where we stand today and every day for equality. On behalf of the Albion Branch of the NAACP, Executive Committee, and members, we welcome you. One of our major goals is to support education and the opportunity for our students in this community. Mayola Dunklin, Chair of the Education Committee, will share briefly about our scholarships.
Good evening. I've already been introduced, so I will just say I'm Mayola Dunklin again, a member of the Education Committee of the Albion Branch of the NAACP and a member of the Albion College Board of Trustees. The NAACP has an ultimate goal that every student should receive a quality public education in preparation of becoming a contributing member of democracy. We support excellence in education for all students. In order for this to happen, a student must be presented with the opportunities after graduating from high school to attend college. And in order for this to happen, the Albion Branch of the NAACP funds this through scholarships. Scholarships are provided by donations and this offering that we will take tonight. It will support our scholarship recipients for the year of 2021. Because of your previous donations and your generosity in 2020, we were able to award 5 scholarships. These students are presently attending Albion College and are in the Bill Albion Fellows Program, which is now known as Bill Albion Bonner Fellows. The 2020 scholarship recipient was Cedriana Marsh, and the 4 additional supporting scholarship recipients were Key Asianique Hill, Lorenz Hill, Cassie Porter, and Victory Stovall. We are so proud of these recipients. And we thank you for the support that you have given us in 2020. We are grateful for your participation and continued support tonight. The offering that we take tonight will support the NAACP 2021 scholarship recipients. There are 2 ways that you may give tonight. First, you may give by PayPal, referencing albionnaacp@gmail.com, or issuing a check payable to the Albion Branch of the NAACP, mailed to Post Office Box 751, Albion, Michigan. In the memo of the check, please note scholarship. This information is posted on Facebook in the comments and also in the chat feature of Zoom. At this time, you may make your contributions as you listen to the wonderful and amazing voices of Albion College Choir as they sing the hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Thank you for your support and enjoy the program.
Bring evening. My name is Reverend Salona Hayes, and I am the pastor of Lewis Chapel AME Church in Albion, Michigan. Let us pray. God of our weary years and God of our silent tears, a God who has brought us thus far on the way, God who has by thy might led us into thy light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Almighty and eternal God, we first and foremost bless your holy name. We come to you, Lord, to express our gratitude from rescuing us from the vestiges of darker days and a gloomy past. By your hand of goodness and mercy, you freed us from chattel slavery, and you delivered us from the enemies of justice and righteousness. It is for the sake of your everlasting love and for your faithfulness towards us that we now pray for your spirit of justice and righteousness to prevail in this hour. In the words of your prophet, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we pray that you, God, help us. Help us, oh God, to work with a renewed vigor for a warless world, a better distribution of wealth, and a brotherhood that transcends race and color. We need you, God. Help us to be servants of your righteousness and to work with you to create a more fair and just nation and world. Teach us, O Lord, how to choose to do what is best and right so that all people might be free. Teach us, O Lord, to go the right way and to make the high and moral path our choice, in order that we might live together as equals, lest we perish separately as fools. Show us, Almighty God, how we can rid our nation of unjust disparities in healthcare and in wages, in education and in employment. How we can care for and encourage whom Jesus called the least of those in our communities, encouraging the elderly, caring for the orphan, and welcoming the foreigner. With your help, Almighty God, this we will do. If we are willing to beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. This we will do if we are willing to work and live together as a beloved community. This we will and shall do if you be on our side. God, we thank you in this and all things. We ask and declare it in your name. Amen.
Greetings. I am Wesley Arden Dick, Albion College Professor of History and Second Vice President of the Albion Branch, NAACP. My role is to provide a brief historical context for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. I also want to offer a glimpse into Albion's history and remind us why we are gathered here in this place, here in this virtual space. We are here because it is the Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. The Albion commemoration of Dr. King's life originated in the Albion community through the guiding hand of the Albion Branch, NAACP, and Albion Black churches. Later, Albion College hosted MLK convocations. In the 21st century, the MLK convocation has become the signature college community collaboration. Recent keynote speakers have included civil rights icons Julian Bond and Diane Nash, prize-winning journalists Eugene Robinson and Rochelle Riley, and distinguished Albion College alumni Ruth Holland Scott, Michael Williams, and Daniel Edwards. The MLK convocation is a time for reflecting on the past and for asking, where do we go from here? We are honored to have Dr. Oveta Fuller carry on this keynote tradition. We are here because Martin Luther King Jr. came to Albion on March 13th, 1963. King spoke on the Albion College campus in Goodrich Chapel. His subject the American dream. King noted, America is still essentially a dream, yet largely unfulfilled. The headline in the Albion Evening Recorder for King's speech proclaimed, Northern segregation may be more serious. King added, the South is largely segregated. The North is desegregated legally, but integration is absent from both. The North may develop more tragic segregation, for it is in the North that many Negroes suffer deeper frustration. We are here because this is Albion, Michigan. To understand our community, we need to know its story. Indeed, Albion's story is America's story. Central to that story is Albion in black and white. Today, African Americans comprise 30% of Albion's population. That dimension first took shape when the Albion Malleable Iron Company went to the American South, to Pensacola, Florida, to recruit workers. 64 Black men arrived at the Albion train station in November 1916. The 64 were soon followed by their families. Thus it was that Albion had become a participant city in what became known as the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North. At one of the early Albion Emancipation Day parades, young boys carried placards that read, "We came to Albion to find a home." More waves of the Great Migration washed over Albion, more African Americans made Albion their home, and nothing would ever be the same. Nothing would ever be the same. Having fled Southern segregation, racism, and violence, these great migrators to Albion experienced the Northern segregation and racism that Dr. King talked about during his Albion visit. The good news is that Albion African Americans formed a chapter of the NAACP, spoke up and protested segregated schools and theaters. We honor those Albion African Americans who bent the arc of the moral universe toward justice. We are here because Albion College has become a campus of rich diversity. When Dr. King looked out from the stage at Goodrich Chapel, there were only a half dozen African American students. Jess Womack, a student in 1963, recalled, Black was not a primary color at Albion College in the early 1960s. If Dr. King were to witness the Albion College student body today, he would find a transformed campus. In 2021, the number of African American students is well over 200. The number of Latinx students has also skyrocketed. Today, the Albion College student body looks like America. Some of our students are from Albion through the Build Albion Fellows Program. Others are from faraway places, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Illinois, and California. This could be described as a great migration of African American and Latinx students to Albion College. Like the impact on the city of Albion of the 1916 Great Migration, the recent Great Migration of students to Albion College portends that nothing will ever be the same. We are here because Albion and Albion College were not exempt from the coronavirus pandemic and the virus of racism made manifest by the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Dr. King will be pleased to know that the Albion Branch NAACP, the Albion community, and Albion College supported the Black Lives Matter protests of the past year, and also stepped up to mitigate the racial health disparities revealed by the pandemic. We're also here because white supremacists shockingly attempted to overthrow the presidential election by staging a violent insurrection at the national Capitol in Washington, D.C. Another ugly reminder that racism is alive and well in America. Following the insurrection, many Americans proclaimed, "This is not who we are." I conclude with a comment by Dr. King, made just before his death, on who we are. Dr. King said, "The American people are infected with racism. That is the peril. Paradoxically," he said, "they are also infected with democratic ideals. That is the hope." African Americans and their allies have always turned to music to get them through perilous times. Music can still inspire us. Please welcome the Albion College Choir performance of No Color.
Thank you, Albion College Concert Choir. I am Reverend Donald. I will start again so you can hear me. Thank you, Albion College Concert Choir. I'm Reverend Donald Phillips, who serves as the chaplain of Albion College, president of the Albion Ministerial Association, and pastor of Brown Chapel AME Church in Ypsilanti. It is my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Oveta Fuller. Dr. Fuller is an associate professor of microbiology and immunology in the medical school and faculty in the STEM initiative of the African Studies Center at the University of Michigan. He is also an adjunct professor at Payne Theological Seminary and an ordained itinerant elder and former pastor of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Reverend Dr. Fuller pastored Bethel AME Church in Adrian, Michigan for 7 years. And feeling the draw to deeper service, she chose to combine her scientific training and her theological training and left the local pastorate for a global mission field. She developed the Trusted Messenger program. See, as a virologist, Dr. Fuller's laboratory team had published studies on herpes simplex and influenza viruses. She also taught and still teaches at U of M Medical School, graduate, dental, and undergraduate students about human virus pathogens. And through the Trusted Messenger program, she developed more than a decade ago. She has empowered networks of religious and community leaders in Zambia, South Africa, and in the US. And she did it by going there and sharing her life with the community firsthand to effectively engage in infectious disease prevention. Currently, throughout 2020, as COVID-19 grew into a pandemic, Dr. Fuller regularly shared science-based insights to communities through conversations, webinars, articles, and other media. And she currently serves on the nation's Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, which examines COVID-19 vaccines for the Food and Drug Administration and records them for use by the public. To serve on this committee, she needed to be thoroughly vetted to make sure there were no conflicts of interest, and they found none. Dr. Fuller is many things. She is a proclaimer of good news. She is a community servant. She is a teacher and educator and a philanthropist. And I share tonight that Dr. Fuller indeed has been vetted. Dr. Fuller is a trusted messenger. And how fitting to have Dr. Fuller now at the beginning of Women's History Month, as she makes history as our first virtual speaker for the MLK Convocation. So on behalf of Albion College and on behalf also of the Albion Ministerial Association and the NAACP as well, we welcome you, Dr. Fuller, to share with us. Let us welcome her with smiles on our faces.
Always remember to unmute, I think. All right, thank you so much, Reverend Phillips, Pastor Phillips, for that wonderful introduction, and to the President Johnson, who I just met tonight, but find that we have a lot to share in the future, hopefully. To the Dunklins of the NAACP, Reverend Hayes and the beloved community near and far, Director McLean of the Gerald Ford Institute, and other members of the Martin Luther King Committee for this invitation and honor. I especially want to recognize Pastor Donald Phillips, who I believe was the committee member that must have brought me up to people making this decision, and his spouse, Reverend Dr. Talia Phillips, who are servants wonderfully to our church family, Brown Chapel in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I also want to acknowledge the Lisa and James Wilson of the Wilson Institute of Medicine at Albion. Dr. Jim Wilson, interestingly enough, was an assistant professor and a joint faculty member in the microbiology and immunology department at U of M in my early days of exploring viruses as vectors. And then Dr. Dick, what an amazing legacy you have of 50 years, my goodness. I also want to say hello to my spouse, Dr. Jerry Caldwell, and family and friends and colleagues in acknowledging this very special honor to commemorate the wonderful work and amazing legacy yet to be filled of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on this historical 2021 occasion. We indeed are living in a unique time of American and world history, a worldwide pandemic of a newly evolved virus called SARS coronavirus 2. It has changed the entire world and likely will have a lasting impact on how life forward goes for us here in Albion, in Michigan, in the USA, and really around the world. So what can we say? In the true sharing spirit of Dr. King, in the short time this evening that we have from a topic, justice and health disparities in the midst of a pandemic. For this committee, there's a whole lot in there. Justice, what is right? Health disparities, health equity, myths. We're right in the midst of it. The fearsome urgency of now. The pandemic meaning all over the world. We are in 2 pandemics here in 2020 and 2021. So it's an awesome assignment tonight to bring together history and present time from such a theme. I'm really, really thankful for the committee's wisdom of having a question and answer discussion time because I think we're going to need it. So once I thought about and prayed about it to hear about what to say this evening from me, one who is certainly not able to stand in the steps of those who have been the speakers for this event, like Julian Bond, and even to share this time, I'm so honored. Once I explored my thoughts and position on justice and health equity and pandemic, there's one message that kept coming clearer and clearer. And so I want to give you the takeaway tonight, just in case your internet goes out or my internet goes out or whatever might be the case. The takeaway tonight, we are all in this together. We are all in this together. This being, we're in the midst of a pandemic. COVID is really here. It's been here. We celebrate now about a year from the time that the first persons in the USA died from COVID-19. It was around March 1st that we recognized and did a first webinar saying, get ready, this is a respiratory pathogen that is going to come. It's probably going to be a major one. So if you will join me, please, for just a moment of silence for the over 500,000 lives that have been lost to COVID, as well as those who have lives have been changed by either disease or employment or other ways during this last year and a half. Let us just pause for just a moment, please. We honor them and we honor their lives and their memory. We are in this together, this being the need as human beings for justice. This being health equity, a right to be well, as all human beings are born with a right to be well. We really are one humanity. We are all made in the image of God. Genesis 1:26-27 says, now let us make a new creation, humanity, made in our image, fashioned according to our likeness. So God did just that. They made them. He created humankind in his image and gave them authority, a directive to be fruitful and multiply and to be trustees of the earth, to care for the entire creation. That is us. So now, as we move forward into this virtual historical moment to commemorate this annual Albion College and NAACP event, let us get the take-home message. We are all in this together. A favorite utterance of mine from Dr. King that was first appreciated from my early years as faculty in Michigan remains highly relevant in this midst of the times we are in as part of the theme. This was in a collection of 5 lectures that Dr. King gave in November and December of 1967 that was published after his death in the book called The Trumpet of Conscience. The collection was written in the last year, well after the civil rights movement, after the Voting Rights Act had passed and the march from Selma to Montgomery had occurred. These essays sum up his lasting creed and legacy, the things he would be concerned about today should he be with us here, a testament to racism and poverty and war and how these things must not be prevalent. Dr. King said, now the judgment of God is upon us, and we We must either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we are going to die together as fools. This clearly states in no uncertain terms, we are in this together. One earth, one globe, one people, humankind. We have to wisely learn to live together in peace and on purpose, or we will perish together. So the question tonight is, how do we best use this short time together? How do we leave here each better prepared to be about building the world we must get to? Let's look at the theme of this 2021 committee chosen MLK Day. Justice. I like to define things so we know exactly what we're talking about. It's called the quality of being impartial or fair or right action, conforming to truth, fact, or reason. Conforming to truth, fact, or reason, not false. The opposite is injustice, which is the absence of justice or violation of the right or rights of another. Unfairness, a wrong and unfair act. Dr. Martin Luther King had much to say about justice. His life's work was about seeking to correct the injustice that plagued the United States in oppression of life every day for its people of color, particularly for the Negro in America, as he would say. I wish that this was fixed by the time of these dual pandemics we're in that were revealed in 2020, but it's not. I want to tell you, when I was a child, and I asked, where were you when Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and SNCC were mobilizing? Well, I was a child, young, less than 10 years old. I was growing up on a rural farm in North Carolina. I happily was surrounded by and watched over and lovingly protected from some of the ugliness of the USA by my father and my mother and my grandmother and my uncles. I was a happy child, collecting leaves for my biology project with my dad, and canning food and preserves and freezing vegetables and planting flowers with my grandmother, Lily Pearl. As a kid, I was her shadow. All these things were seeding the curiosity of a young scientist. The years of work of Dr. King, Fannie Lou Hamer, John Lewis, and so many, many more, and hundreds of thousands of regular, everyday, ordinary people, people like you and me in the mid-1900s, could not fix the profound impact of injustice deeply rooted in the enslavement fabric of early America. It's been there for over 400 years. To fix it requires realizing it, recognizing it, dealing with it in all the possible painful ways, so to move to a better way forward. A deep wound cannot be healed until it is opened and cleaned and allowed to receive the fresh air and light and wellness. Yes, we also are in a pandemic of COVID-19, along with the injustices that come from enslavement in America and that legacy. A lot of my time this year has passed working with COVID and still does. And I hope we can take some questions about that in the Q and answer period. Yes, we have health disparities. This is clear if you look at the deaths and sicknesses and the loss of jobs from COVID-19. And yet the root issues of inequities, of white privilege and inherent bias and institutionalized injustices have been present since before the nation was officially born as a democratic republic seeking to become a more perfect nation. I have a picture about these disparities, but unless we get to it later in the question and answer, I'm not going to use the time now to show it. Foremost tonight, let us focus on together exploring the root, the damaged foundation, and the core of our country that both 2020 pandemics clearly have unveiled. And then, my sisters and brothers, let us pray for wisdom and courage to look towards the action or actions, one by one, individual by individual, to begin healing of our communities, of our nation, and of our world. We are one nation under God with liberty and the pursuit of happiness for all. So in the spirit of science, or maybe science fiction, I ask you to go with me on a time travel. Let's do a time travel back in history. Let's get on our space capsule, our time travel capsule, and travel back for just a bit. We will return, I promise you, to 2021 before we also travel together into the future. It's the future, by the way, that we are making now, because then we will be history. So the take home from this time travel is that the deep, strong roots of injustice and anti-Black or other racism that have been revealed by the dual 2020 pandemics, the coronavirus, and the very visible and visceral murder of George Floyd that we saw in 2020 is rooted in the wrongs of human enslavement, mainly of people of African heritage, those with skin kissed by the sun, of African Americans, of Black folks in the Americas, or Negroes, as Dr. King would have called us. Let's travel back and take a look at the backstory. Africa is the birthplace of humankind, of agriculture and mathematics, and of so much more. Focus on African American history today because we don't have time to travel as far back as we might in our time capsule. Let us arrive in 1620. In school, most of us learned that 122 passengers, the Puritans on the Mayflower, came to America fleeing England for religious freedom. They came to the eastern shore of North America, Virginia to be specific, to establish what they would call a self-governing democracy for white people. We were taught as if the land was vacant, waiting to be discovered. In 1620 and years before, indigenous people, some called Native Americans, were already governing themselves quite well in this continent, in their nations. This is the truth. Every person at this virtual event tonight likely has heard about the Mayflower and even the history of the names of the people who were there. Nicole Hannah-Jones, in the book 400 Souls, A Community History of African Americans from 1619 to 2019, that my husband actually shared with me, that I think is an amazing book, which I surely highly recommend to everyone, tells the story of the White Lion. In August 1619, a ship, the White Lion, dropped anchor on the coast of eastern shore of North America. The White Lion is one of the most important ships ever in American history. But have you heard of it? There is no ship manifesto, and the names of its passengers, including 20 and some Negro passengers, are not known. Arrival of these 20 or so passengers was deemed insignificant. We don't even know really how many were packed into the ship's hull. In his book, Before the Mayflower, published in 1962, scholar Lerone Bennett Jr. documents that 20 to 30 Angolians were traded by criminal English marauders in exchange for food and supplies. Those Angolians had been captured and stolen from another ship whose trade was captured and kidnapped human cargo from the western shores of Africa. In Jamestown, these people of African descent that embarked from the White Lion in shackles, not as people, but as property, they were sold to white colonies, beginning to, quote, birth democracy. Nicole Hannah-Jones further writes, this has been neglected to what Bennett calls the back alley of American history. There are no annual commemorations. There are no holidays to celebrate them. The people from the White Lion have been expunged from our collective memory, intentionally omitted. In beginning to heal America, which starts with each one of us, we need to know that when creating a shared history, what we remember is just as revealing as what we forget. If the Mayflower was the advent of American freedom as the US celebrates on July 4th, then the arrival of the White Lion was the advent of American slavery. What do we do with that? We're in this together. Today, in February 2021, in the midst of two pandemics, COVID-19 and anti-Black racism, our country and its people are reeling from the legacy of these events. 400 years ago and counting, after these two ships, the White Lion in 1619 and the Mayflower in 1620, arrived here. One is taught to every child, one is omitted. Few ships before or since have unloaded persons as significant as those that came from the White Lion. But yet we propagate history. W.E.B. Du Bois called it lies agreed upon, misinformation, and miseducation. If we are going to go forth in the spirit of what Dr. King and others fought so hard for, we have got to do this together and acknowledge from whence we've come. Institutions and systems in America have tweaked, falsified the nature of its history because it is either uninformed or ashamed or both. Well, we have to get past it. We have to move through this. We have to go back and get the truth. We have to unpack it and move forward to have the difficult conversations and take the actions to heal, truly heal the people and heal the land. Institutions, those historically with the major political and economical power, have not fully revealed the events, not pretty, that bridged the three countries that made America: Africa, Europe, and North America. Frederick Douglass declared at one July 4th celebration that the American Revolution in the 1600s liberated white people, but subjugated another 200 years of bondage its citizens that descended from the White Lion. My Albion community family, what if we could take a time capsule and travel back and change the events of the last 400 years since the White Lion and the Mayflower arrived? How would the US, how would you and I be different? What has been omitted or not recorded because those who perpetuated it thought they had to write to other people's bodies, other people's ideas, other people's inventions, and children and businesses? Those who suffered it, survived by moving through it and beyond it, are who we stand with today. Frederick Douglass also on July 4th said, "America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to its future." We turn to others and for more than a century seek to expand democracy abroad, beckoning our lands to, quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses longing to be free." Yet we violently suppress democracy at home for the involuntary immigrants who arrived on ships like the White Lion. So today in 2021, what can we do to unpack this and to make this right? What could have been done then had we actually been there in our time capsule? What can we do now to recognize these important moments in our collective, yes, our collective history? We are in this together. We are one humankind, all God's beloved creation. So let's climb back into our time capsule and return now to the 21st century. Today in the 21st century, we see the first Black man elected as the 44th president, the POTUS of the USA. Then the same USA elected a white nationalist as the 45th president. We saw the same split, the ugly head of the legacy of American enslavement 200 years ago in the deadliest war of this country, the Civil War, which was really about how much of our nation would be enslaved and how much would be free, although that was not what I was taught in history classes. Someone defined insanity as to keep doing the same old things the same old way and expect different results. I ask you, are we insane as a nation, as a people? Where are we now in 2021? This is the era of Black Lives Matter. This phrase captures the last 400 years. Where are we in 2021? Well, God has set down the entire world with the respiratory virus deemed SARS-CoV-2. In just a few months, he's done this. Today, we are 12 months from the recognition that a respiratory pandemic was here. This has allowed from natural evolution of a tiny microbe for everyone's attention to be obtained. It has unveiled anti-Blackness in the Americas, in the world. It has taken us out of religiosity and worshiping in buildings made by hand to learning to worship in spirit and truth. It has taught us the value of truly caring about our families, our neighbors, our leaders. It has brought into plain sight injustice and inequality. From this event, the virus pandemic, we also get a glimpse of what drastic change can bring. Cleared the air, cleaner air, birds singing, animals coming to places they were never before. It has slowed the destruction of the environment, the one earth that we live on, by reducing the air pollution from all those motor vehicles and humans around the world rushing to get wherever we were going. In our time travel, let's jump back to the reality of March 4th, 2021. Here we are on a Thursday evening, focused at Albion College, a place that was originally set up by Methodist settlers to meet the needs of children of the indigenous people who lived in Michigan. We have survived a pandemic that has killed over 500,000 people in the US and millions around the world. We have an opportunity to get to the light at the other end with preventions, with masking, with distancing, and with high uptake of a very effective vaccine that protects against disease and death. In doing this, can we live like brothers and sisters? Can we work together and care about each other and not just our own selfish wishes, desires, greed, frustrations, ego, anger, and fear? Can we look honestly at the truth of who we are, our systemic injustices and biases, and institutional inequities, and change? There's a story about explaining what equity is, and I'm going to move to my end here. But a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old were both invited to view a beautiful new brown spotted pony on the other side of a boarded up fence. Both eagerly wanted to see the beautiful pony. They both had equal opportunity and an equal invitation, but one could partake of this special joy, the other could not. But then equity steps in when someone realizes that equal opportunity does not allow the 4-year-old to see over the top of the fence. This realization, this understanding, this truth prompts action to fix the situation, to bring a step stool or to block or to bring a block or a chair or whatever it takes so the 4-year-old can make up the difference in height. The 4-year-old then can see with his or her own eyes and enjoy the beautiful brown spotted pony. That's what equity is. How do we get to honest answers to the inequities in social conditions, in incomes, in wealth, in resources, in health that divide us more and more? I put to you tonight that it may not be easy. It will require difficult conversations. It will require different choices. It will require new processes. It will require getting past our anger, our hurt, our fear. But this is necessary if we are to reveal the wrongs, the foundational wrongs, and begin to heal the deep-rooted legacy and injustice brought by enslavement. I'd like to leave you with my take on the January 6, 2021 insurgents at the USA Capitol. I was in my kitchen watching on my iPad as I was making lunch or a meal for the evening. And I saw the whole thing evolve. I wanted to see what our vice president would do with the challenge before him. The more I watched, the more I said to myself, is this really happening? Am I losing my mind? This is surreal. I even reached out to others for a reality check and sent several emails. I was part later on at 5 o'clock of an emergency national call to faith leaders for prayer, an interfaith prayer group arranged at the spur of this moment. I realized recently in reflection that I'm still angry about what happened and the sheer boldness of those who sought to lynch Pence and capture Nancy while disrespectfully entering a public place of our country. If that had been people of color, mostly, as we saw in the Black Lives Matters March in June or July of 2020, they would either be dead or at least arrested immediately. But I'm learning not to hate. I'm applying what James Baldwin wrote. Imagine that one of the reasons people cling to hate so stubbornly is because they sense that once the hate is gone, they would be forced to deal with the pain. I realize that I have some anger inside and hurt from the years of living as a scientist and an educator and a woman and an African American in America. But I also know I also know the healing power of love. I know that love from my family that I described to you in the days of North Carolina as a child, from my community, and mostly of all from God, who created me in their image. I have decided to channel the frustration and anger into positive action that will help to reveal the truth, learn the truth, and have those difficult conversations, persevere through tough times and even oppressive moments. As Dr. King said, I have decided to choose love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to try to love my neighbor as myself. As we travel forward into another 40 to 50 years in our time capsule, imagine 2050 or 2072, what will the future for our children and grandchildren be like? How can we make things better now by getting to the true deep root, reclaiming the truth, going back and getting it, unlearning the ways that have not been productive, moving forward in a new knowing? A colleague shared recently that she does not use the words white supremacist in defining one group of people or an attitude that is overtly held and covertly permeating this country. She has a term for defining this phenomena, and words really matter. She calls it deliberate systems of inequities. Deliberate systems of inequities. You may remember the childhood limerick: if you are white, you are all right. If you're brown, stick around. And if you're black, get back. Words do have power, but it's time to change their meaning. It's time to move history and to shape what we want for 2050 and 2072. 2020 events have revealed two pandemics: a respiratory virus that shut down the whole world and a legacy of inequities in jobs, livelihood, education, policing, justice. To get through the COVID pandemic, we must work together as individuals. To get to a just world of equity, we also must work together. Opening up early in Texas or anywhere now, as we are moving toward an end to the pandemic, we can see the light at the tunnel. It's like someone described, and excuse this very vivid scene, it's like setting aside a specific urinating area in a swimming pool. It does not work because we are all in this together. We salute Dr. King, we salute his legacy, but we have to get to the root, to the foundation. We might not get there immediately. It will take some time. It will take a continual attitude of change. Susie King Taylor, a former slave and an army nurse, said, "God is just. When they created humankind, they made them in their image and never intended that one should misuse the other. All humankind is born free and equal in God's sight." Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman US Senator, even as we celebrate our Vice President Harris, said, "Health is a human right, not a privilege to be purchased." We can begin the change and bring the truth unveiled to move forward to a healthier time for all. We are in this together. And I want to leave you with the words of Dr. King himself. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere." So what can we do individually and together? Remember the truth from his final introspection that I'll share. Strangely enough, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. We are in this together. Thank you for your attention and your time, and may God bless you and keep you as we move forward together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fuller. Powerful statements and sharing, and certainly look forward to having a chance to dialogue with you in the Q&A portion of our program. A couple of things that you said really stuck out, and this acknowledgments you said repeatedly to us that we are in this together. We are in this together, and that is so very true. And I had to stop for a moment and write a note that something that hit me. I was on mute, but I was saying, wow, it was that what we remember is just as revealing as what we forget. What we remember is just as revealing as what we forget. Well, on this evening, as a transitional point, we have a special opportunity to to honor someone who has helped us to remember. On this evening, this MLK Convocation, we have the honor to recognize someone who has spent 60 years in the teaching field, wonderfully 53 of them at Albion College. And that is in the person of Dr. Wesley Dick. This is a surprise for him. He just does not know this is happening. So he's probably at home looking, saying, what's going on? But we saw fit to recognize you, Dr. Wesley Dick, as you have chosen to retire this year. So this is your last MLK Convocation as officially on staff, but I'm sure it is not your last. You have created such a wonderful legacy with this event, and you have certainly spent a lifetime choosing a lifetime of service on and off of the campus. You have helped to develop this program, and we appreciate you again, Dr. Dick. Thousands of students and community members have been impacted by your tireless work. And tonight, one of those students sent a video of appreciation. Let us hear a special greeting for Dr. Wesley Dick.
So I am Q Langston, and I want to acknowledge and thank Mr. West Dick. When you think about West Dick, you think of someone who's left a great legacy in Albion and Albion College. He shows pride in all he does, but humbly. He's like a walking library, as I say. He's so knowledgeable, wise, and if you never had a class with him, you left a conversation knowing more than you thought and questioning everything you thought you knew. I would like to thank him on behalf of Alexa Garza from class of 2018. She said he bought her some books and she admires his work and everything he talked about in class. And she just wants to say thank you again. And that just shows what great of a leader you are. When someone's in need and we need help and true values, you show that and you show your character within who you are and around those who need you. And some acts are done without being noticed and also not being very known, but that's just who you are. Walking legacy, I will say, and a walking library. Thank you for all you have done.
Again, thank you, thank you, Q, for sharing that on behalf of students and acknowledging you, Dr. Westdick. You've been wonderful for our collective experience. And again, thank you for helping us to remember those things that are important in drawing us together. Listen, if you're on Facebook Live right now, go ahead and put some thumbs up or some hearts in the chat just to celebrate Dr. Wesley Dick. We are so very glad to know you and for the impact and legacy you have left on the Albion community. At this time, we're ready to receive our benediction. And again, a reminder that after the benediction, please, those who desire, stick around for a Q&A section with Dr. Fuller. She has so graciously offered her time to share and engage with our community. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you tonight for what our ears have heard, what our eyes have seen, but more importantly, what our spirits have felt. We thank you for this opportunity to come together as community, even in a virtual space, and to hear our connectedness. We thank you that we are connected with Dr. King, connected with his legacy of service, connected with many others that stood on his shoulders. We thank you that we have the opportunity to make our own mark, to make a difference, to impact two pandemics, both a justice pandemic and also a health pandemic. We pray now that we would not let go of the plow, but continue to move forward in power and strength and faith and in justice. Now, as we transition in the virtual space, give us wisdom, give us insight, and give us hope. This we pray in your holy and righteous name. Amen. Now I believe we will transition to our Q&A portion with Patrick McLean.
I'm going to look for guidance from our background person, Hannah Matson, who I believe there's still some some final words to come, or Hannah, should I go ahead with questions and answers?
You can go ahead with questions and answers, yes.
All right, thanks very much. Well, we certainly welcome questions. I have a few from some different sources, so I'll start with those, but there is room for much more. And Dr. Fuller has graciously offered to do this and has opened the door for a few particular areas of questioning. So I'll start with one of those, and the issue of health disparities. I think it's fairly widely recognized that there have been disparate impacts of COVID-19 on minority populations. But how do you assess our actions in actually caring for all of our citizens equally? So people know about it, but I'm not sure we're following through and doing that. How do you assess the U.S.'s record on this in the last year, as well as Michigan's record?
Thank you. I think you put the 400 souls in the chat, so thank you very much for making that available to people. Yes, so I think the COVID pandemic helped to unveil or focus on the disparities that have been around, that we've known about for years. And because it was so abrupt, for example, early in May, there was like 14%, the African Americans in Michigan are 14% of the population, but are somewhere 40% of the number of COVID deaths. So it was such a stark difference, it's such a stark data that I believe leaders were prompted to say, what can we do about this? So I know the state of Michigan, for example, put together a task force that was headed by Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, which looked at how to actually help mitigate the discrepancies with COVID. And so, for example, as we see the vaccine rollout now, we have zip codes that are identified as areas where there were high incidences or high levels of COVID disease and hospitalizations and death. And the clinics and pharmacies and even some community areas are being targeted as places to get the vaccine to, so that those citizens who are highly at risk are the ones that get the vaccine. So I think this unveiling has helped, Director McLean has helped to focus in on this. We've got a long way to go. And I know this is happening around the country, in Connecticut, in Virginia, in Florida, where specific actions are being taken, but there's so much more to be done. There's so much more to be done. And this is both for the physicians and medical people, as well as for those who need to get the information. We can't wait till somebody tells us what to do. We have to become proactive and seek out information on our own. And so it's all in this together, coming to bear on the question of disparities.
Thank you for that. We've got a question from the audience, and the question is about the effectiveness of single dose versus the 2-dose vaccinations. Can you talk a little bit about a difference? The question was specifically about difference in immunity, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what it even means. What is effectiveness? When we've heard different percentage rates, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that.
Sure, and I'm much more comfortable talking about COVID and the vaccines than I am about how to solve health disparities. So I feel a little bit more on comfortable ground here. Yes, so the vaccines that were first approved, Pfizer and Moderna, are 2-dose vaccines to get up to what is called 94 to 95% efficacy. And that's simply saying how effective, how good are they at blocking disease and death from COVID. And then the recently approved J&J or Janssen vaccine is a 1-dose vaccine that has about, in blocking deaths and serious illness, up to 70 to 85% efficacy. It's a little bit less in terms of blocking symptoms. And all of these vaccines, by the way, were monitored for their ability to block symptoms of coronavirus, of COVID. And so the fever, the fatigue, the difficulty in breathing, those were the things that when people who were in the study came up with those self-reported symptoms, they were looked at. The study was ultimately unblinded to see whether the people with symptoms were in the vaccine group or in the placebo group. So roughly explaining efficacy, if you had 100 people and 100 cases, that came up out of the 30,000 people that were being followed in the study. For Johnson & Johnson, between 90 and 95 would have gotten the vaccine that were protected from infection. And 95 of those people who got symptoms would be in the placebo group. 5 of those people would be in the vaccine group. So that means that the vaccine is 95% protective against COVID disease. Or for J&J, say we had the same thing. We had 100 people that got symptoms that were detected or reported. Then 75 to 80 of those would be in the placebo group, the control group that got sugar, water, or salt, whereas 20 maybe would be in the group that got vaccine. And even those 20 had very mild symptoms, like maybe headache or some fatigue, compared to the severe illness in the group that did not get the vaccine. So that's what efficacy means. And for both of these, all 3 of these vaccines, they are really good vaccines. Our annual flu shot is not nearly as good as either of these. When we have a good year, we have a flu shot that's 80% effective. So these are excellent vaccines, all 3 of them.
Given the difference in the efficacy and the percentages that you cited, if someone has an opportunity to get one that is a higher efficacy versus a lower one, should people wait and not take the lower one, or should people try to get whatever vaccine they can as soon as possible?
Yes, we get this question often, and the answer is you should get the first vaccine that you can get, because the difference between 75% protection, and with all of them, you still need to wear the mask and keep the distance, because the virus is still circulating, and we don't know that they block infection, even though we think they reduce it. So it's possible that someone who's been vaccinated can get infection and not get sick and not get symptoms, but carry that virus to someone who has not yet been vaccinated. So it's really, really important to continue to make sure that any air you're breathing out is covered with a mask correctly worn. And so, yes, whatever vaccine it is, don't think that the J&J is inferior in any real way. It's one dose, and it's highly effective in preventing disease and death from COVID and coronavirus infection. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd get whatever was available. Also, the side effects reported for all 3 in the clinical trials, and then what has actually happened in the rollout of over 50 million people with Moderna and Pfizer are very similar to what the clinical trial said. And that gives me comfort. In other words, when it's gone into a wider range of people than were in the clinical trials, we're still seeing the same side effects from the vaccine. And those actually occur within the first 2 or 3 days. By the 3rd day, they're typically gone. They're clearly defined in material when you get the vaccination, and that's what we're actually seeing. So there's no surprises that have cropped up as the vaccine has rolled out. And that to me is very, very comforting.
Dr. James Curtis has joined us. I'm certainly glad to have him with us. And he's asked another really good question. What can be done to convince more people of color to accept the vaccination, since currently fewer people of color have chosen to be vaccinated?
Well, that's an interesting stat. I was looking at something just the other day, or just yesterday, that said that really, if you look at the people who have most virus hesitancy, this might shock you, it is actually not African Americans or people of color. It's white, more Republicans who don't believe that this is really a virus or really there. So some 56 or over 50% are saying they would not get the vaccine of the people in this particular poll between November and February. And then for Blacks and Hispanics, Latinx is around 26%, something like that. And then for whites who are not identified as Republicans or conservatives, it's about 7%. So for everyone, particularly people of color who are at highest risk for COVID because of many of the social determinants of health, where we live, the jobs that we have, the fact that we can't be home, that we have to be out, the fact that we have more difficulty accessing healthcare, or that there's some implicit biases that when we say we need something, we don't get it because we don't have enough of the symptoms to justify whatever the care is that's needed. So even with those, we need to go ahead and get the vaccine because it is protective against disease. And I think sharing that with other people, asking the questions, learning that the side effects are temporary, learning that this is not a conspiracy, that most people who get the vaccine actually some have no side effects, but most of them, as far as we can tell from the data, are done with the side effects in 2 or 3 days. The immunity comes up in somewhere between 14 and 20 days. And that's a huge plus for getting us all out of this pandemic. It means our hospitals aren't overflowing. People who don't have COVID but have other medical issues can get medical care. So we need to do this for ourselves. We need to do this for our society. We want to be able to hug our grandchildren and get together for Thanksgiving and go on trips again and gather for family dinners with extended family. And if we do these things that are before us, including the vaccines and the masking and the distancing consistently, we can get there. We have everything amazingly needed to do it. We just need to have the discipline and caring one another to actually get it done. I believe we can. I'm trusting that we will, because as human beings, we are naturally social beings, and we want to get back to that, to a new type of socializing. And so we have to each do this.
I'm pleased to see a couple of good questions from some of my Ford students. The first one is about the variants that we've been hearing about really for the last maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, have come up a lot more. And can you talk a little bit about those and how their presence affects the spread of the virus as a whole, and what happens with those who are affected by it or infected with it?
Sure, that's a very important question in this time. So let me explain first of all what these variants are. Viruses have to reproduce in cells, and one gets in and it makes lots more. And so in that process, coronavirus in particular can change. There are mistakes that are made in their reproduction of their genetic material. If one of those mistakes is a positive change for the virus, if it makes it fitter, if you will, to either circulate or reproduce quicker or faster or get around our immune defenses, then that mutation or that variant is going to rise to the top of the pile, and it's going to outcompete all the others. And so that's what we see happening. Fortunately, most of the variants are changing in the same place that make them more easy to transmit, easy to go from one person to another. And what that means is that if it originally took 10 viruses, let's say, to get in my nasal passages to get me infected, with the new variants, it might only take 5. Or if it took 30 minutes of exposure around somebody that was asymptomatic, now it will take only 15 minutes of being around that person to get enough virus in to get infected. So these variants are really important to know about, and we're doing more sequencing and following what's actually circulating so we know what's happening. But the critical piece is that the way we shut down the opportunity for the virus to change, and right now, the vaccines that are available, particularly the Johnson & Johnson, which was tested in Brazil and South Africa and the US, seem to be dealing with or reactive against all the existing variants. The danger will be if we allow viruses to keep circulating, so we don't stop infections, we don't continue to take this down, that one of the existent variants will have another variation that the vaccines won't cover. And so the best thing that individuals and all of us could do is to do everything we can to keep this decline that we're seeing happening in the US and around the world very active, and to try to get as many people immunized as possible, either with the vaccine or for those people that have had COVID. And I'll just say here, because I'm not sure how much time we're going to have, I can stay, but let me just say, and this is a very sobering thought, in 3 years, I believe all of us are going to have some immunity to coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2. We're either going to get it one way or the other. We're going to get it by getting infected and surviving. And that means that some people may not. They may get sick and their lives may be changed forever through longer term effects. Or hopefully not, but some people may actually die from COVID virus infection, from COVID and coronavirus infection. Those who survive will be immune for some time. The other way that we will be immune 3 years from now is to have gotten a vaccine. There are 3 choices. Each one of them gives us immunity. And so the least dangerous, least risky way to get immune is to get a vaccine, get vaccinated, get the 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna, or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson. That will give us protection. We don't know for how long. We may have to do boosters subsequently, and those investigations are underway. But that's the better way to get immunity. I forgot what the question was. Oh, variants. Okay, variants then would actually cause us to have to tweak the vaccines to address new variants. And it would be, we could do that. Fortunately, the messenger RNA vaccines are relatively more easy to change, but we don't want to have to do that. If we could just drive this down to such a low level that the chance for variants to arise is greatly, greatly reduced.
Thank you. We've got time, I think, if you're still willing to take a few more. And we've got a question about, talk about public and private institutions having discussions about mandating the vaccine in the future. We've heard talk of vaccine passports, particularly in Europe. What do you think about this? And do you think that this could exacerbate racial disparities? Do you see some communities being more negatively affected by these kinds of mandates than others, perhaps?
Yeah, so in the FDA discussions, it came up that this cannot be mandated at the moment. This vaccine is not mandated. So a company can't say, your job is dependent on your getting the vaccine. It is an elective process, as it should be. But our hope is that people will trust and verify. They will trust that these are good and get the information, that they need about their health in order to be able to make an informed decision. Some people may have to take, if they're allergic to injections, they may have to take their epinephrine pin with them to the injection, to the vaccination site. People are watched very carefully for 15 minutes or 30 minutes after the vaccine. So I think mandating the vaccine is likely not to happen. I wish we would mandate mask wearing and distancing, because that is highly, highly effective. But what probably will happen is that we will be getting a vaccine annually or however often it's shown to be needed. And that some places may say, in order to be compliant with your job status, you need to have gotten the vaccine. That's true at the University of Michigan now for influenza. We have to get an influenza vaccine or show why we haven't gotten one by a certain time. And then for travel, well, right now we already have, if you're traveling to some areas where there's yellow fever or some other pathogens, you have to get the vaccine, and you have to have a yellow card in your passport that show that you've been vaccinated against that. So it's not a disc in your arm, it's not some implant, as some conspiracies say, but it's just simply saying, I realize that this microbe is highly endemic in this area. And before I travel there, I'm going to take the necessary preventions to make sure that I'm fortified such that I'm not at risk when I go there. So I can see that happening. And personally, that would be maybe a very smart way to prevent infections in a certain area, because there are bound to be places where there will be surges at one time or another. Right now in the US, we are a surge place. The US has been a surge place for the last 10 months.
Question that I think really is within the spirit of tonight's MLK celebration, and it has to do with service. And the question is, how could one personally go about being an advocate for safety of everyone, especially with regard to those who maybe don't want to follow mandates, don't want to follow the best advice given by public health officials? What can people do? How can they talk to others to perhaps change their mind in a way that will help everybody?
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of people are asking, and I can just give you some suggestions. It's very important. First of all, the goal or the idea of helping others to get information or get where they need to go is in the spirit of Dr. King, in the spirit of we are our brother's keeper, we are our sister's keeper. Some things I've heard that people do, and a few I've done myself, is just to check with some older, or it doesn't even have to be older, but people who may not be as able to get on computers and navigate things, the portals and the signups that you have to do to register for a vaccine or to put your information there, or simply to offer to drive someone. I heard a story about a family whose father was just very anti-vaccine and was just declaring that the whole thing was not needed. And they kept telling him, Dad, we love you. We really need you to get this because we want you to be here. We want to get together next Thanksgiving. Your daughter's getting married whenever, and we want you to be there. So Dad, we need you to protect yourself. So please, I made an appointment for you at this time. I will come to your house and drive you there. Will you get in the car and go with me? And then have other people who love them. I think we can't shame people into doing things, but we can love them into doing it. And so I think sharing information, helping to set up information sessions, listening to people and what their doubts are, what their concerns are, what their questions are. We have a right to question this. This happened very, very quickly, and yet it is sound. It went through all the steps of the scientific process. It's a major feat of science to be able to get to 3 highly effective and safe vaccines in such a short time by cooperation and sharing information. So I think in that spirit of service, we can look to what we can do for others. And certainly one of the major, I can't overemphasize this point, is that we can continue to correctly wear our mask when we're outside of our home. If we're with somebody else, it's typical, particularly for young adults, to be together and the mask is here and we're walking and talking, but say, hey, you need to put your mask over your nose and your mouth. Make sure the sides are sealed. Those sorts of things done in love, not to shame or not to reprimand, but to say, hey, we want to get to where we don't have to worry about this. And each person matters in this process. And so those are some suggestions. Even college students can, this is happening with a class that I teach at Michigan called The Global Impact of Microbes, where they're doing projects to ask, what can I do to make a difference with COVID-19? How can I help in my fraternity or my sorority or in my apartment complex or my residential hall? What kind of communications can we do to have people talk about this, and how, yes, I do want to get together with my friends. I do want to socialize, but let's look at the big picture for a moment and realize that the sooner we get through this, the sooner we can get back to a new normal where we can do those sorts of things. So yes, there are things that people, if you creatively think about, can do to make a difference in that way. And it's very, very important, including making sure that you don't get infected.
Thank you for that. I think we'll wrap up with one final question that maybe looks forward for us. The question was how you see the global pandemic changing the way society interacts post-COVID-19. But I think I want to add as well, how do you hope we react? How do you hope things change? Perhaps for the better in some ways. What do we learn from all of this?
That's a great question. And I want to make sure that I leave you on a positive note, because I tend to be a truth seeker, and I get to the truth and then I go up from that to something positive. But I want to be sure to leave you with something positive. I think that coronavirus, which came as a natural evolution from bats and perhaps other animals, and there are hundreds of coronavirus. We thought the next pandemic would be influenza, from flu coming from a bird or animal to humans. These are called zoonotic viruses, but it was from coronavirus. And so because we are moving faster around the world, we're traveling, we're going into areas that were previously only animals and vegetation, we're likely to see emergence of other microbes. And we saw that with Ebola in West Africa. And so what I'm hoping we get out of the coronavirus SARS-2 pandemic is that we do need to pay attention. We do need to not say this is a virus from over there, it's their problem. This is a microbe from over here, it's their problem. We need to actually strengthen our health infrastructure, our surveillance infrastructure, places like the World Health Organization where reports are to. We need to begin to understand that we don't act alone, that what I want to do, which is to go visit my mother or my brother or whomever, or to hang out with my friends, may be less important than the societal good, which is for everyone. And so I hope from COVID, we're learning to be less individualistic as a nation. I believe this is why America has had such a difficult time managing the pandemic, because we're individual, rugged individualism, state by state, but the collective good is something that each person pours into. And I hope that that's something we've learned, that if we want to live our lives in a way that we can enjoy the privileges of social interactions, we're going to have to take responsibility for what we do. And I believe this is what's coming out of it. As we see that light at the end of the tunnel now, as the number of cases are going down and the numbers of deaths are plummeting, the vaccines are going up. Let's get that information out. Let's do what we can to get as many people safe as possible from disease. And I believe we will be able to rejoice and celebrate together when our churches open and we can go to movies again, and we can go to wedding receptions and family gatherings. We might have to do something a little different if the numbers get high. We might have to put masks on again, but I think we're headed that way, and I hope the lessons will be lessons we will take with us forward.
Fuller, thank you for that. And I just can't thank you enough for your generosity with your time, with the message that you shared with us, with your doses of reality, tempered with a spirit of hope as well. Tonight has been, like all of our MLK convocations, has been another wonderful evening of celebration of community, and you very much fit into the spirit of what we're trying to do in Albion, and we hope that the day will come when we can welcome you in person. And I know that I speak for everyone on this call that we would love to have you in Albion. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank our panelists and everyone else who was associated with putting this on tonight, our first ever virtual MLK convocation. And here's hoping that next year I will see all of you in the Bohm Theater.
Thank you.